Broadcasting live from Basic Mountain. This is Tap Tap Concede. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of Tap Tap Concede. I'm Cameron. Joining me on my right, your left, is Kathleen.
Hello.
And our very special guest on my left, your right, is Michelle Rapp.
Hello. Well, thanks for having me on. It's nice to be here.
Lovely to have you. Before we get into
you.
anything, Tap Tap Concede is brought to you by the kind people over at cardkingdom.com. Cardkingdom.com, a clean, well-lit place to storm out. That's for free. Y'all can have that one. Card Kingdom is a great online shop, and it's a great series of brick and mortar shops. Stop in, have a coffee at their cafe, or check out their broad selection of stuff. They do commerce. What else? If you go to their online store, you can get all kinds of singles, and if you live in the United States, you can get sealed product. Though they will ship singles anywhere in the world with their suspiciously fast shipping. Otherwise we really like them. They're good people. Check them out. And if you say, or if you go to cardkingdom.com/LRR, that enters our affiliate code. And if you say in the additional field, loading ready run sent me button, please, they'll give you a little 1-inch button, which right now reads snow or foil lands make foil mana, which, we feel is clever.
Don't you want your mana to get blinged out? I mean, that's what, yeah.
I do.
Why settle for regular white mana when you can have foil white mana?
It's sparkly.
It sparkles.
This podcast is also brought to you by you, the viewer, over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Your direct support of us through our Patreon makes all of this possible, and we really appreciate it. So in a very real sense, you did this.
This is your fault.
Yeah. Way to go.
I love the honest presentation of facts as a comedy tactic.
I mean, I'm miserable at these kind of pitches, so honestly, just laying it all out on the line and saying, hey, give these people money so they give us money, works well for me, I feel. But what are we doing this week on Tap Tap Concede? Well, with Michelle Rapp and Kathleen here, we're going to talk about the Strixhaven story. We're going to talk about kind of like the A plot and then the B plot. So let's get into it. Where do we want to start? Michelle, do you want to talk about kind of like the major notes that run through?
Yeah, I would absolutely love to do this. I'm a rather old hat at summarizing things, as I've done so for a long time on the Lore. So I've definitely attempted to put less snark into this particular summary. So well, first of all, the A plot, rather the main magic story for Strixhaven, is written by Adana Washington. So thank you so much for taking the time to write these. So Strixhaven, the story begins with a not so mysterious necromancy professor trying to find respite from endless faculty meetings in between the stacks of books in the Biblioplex. Despite her new name of Professor Onyx, Liliana Vess is not here to collect or catalog new Pokemon, but to figure out how to revive Gideon. Suddenly, a mysterious masked figure attempts to magically assault her in the Biblioplex, and as Liliana casually rebuffs her magic, they bamf out of the Biblioplex while leaving several books behind. Could this person be part of the Auric, the secret society of flunked-out mages that want power at any cost, Liliana wonders? Spoilers, yes, they are. So yeah, that's how we begin. And then we kind of shoot over to Kylum, which was the Battle Bond plane, if anyone remembers that really awesome two-headed giant set. The Kenrith twins are finishing up their basically their last protein forward pinto boxes from Garrick, and have received their acceptance letter from Strixhaven. So Will is really excited about the prospect of books and learning as a blue mage, while Rowan is excited to be on a new place to learn how to punch good, which is also fun. So After grabbing the luggage, Rowan pulls Will into planeswalking to Arcavios, which is the actual name of the plane that Strixhaven is on. Strixhaven is the name of the university. Arcavios is the name of the plane, where they meet up with the inscrutable owl-loving mage Kasmina. Kasmina escorts them to Strixhaven's campus, where the twins immediately involve themselves in a wizarding duel between several students, namely between the Prismari and Silverquill students. So during the match, Will notices this is actually somewhat of a key point, that his ice magic isn't blending with Rowan's as nicely as it was on Kylam during their bouts. But Rowan's not really all that interested in examining this further, typical red mage antics. So while they're doing this, they talk about Kylam, and their conversation attracts Liliana's / Professor Onyx's attention. And she sort of clocks them as planeswalkers as they continue.
The gladiator twins not terribly subtle about...
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, what's interesting about Strixhaven is that it's heavily implied that various planeswalkers have attended Strixhaven, including Liliana herself. It's actually directly referenced that she must have come here maybe after she sparked and after she spent some time on Innistrad. So sometime in those 200 years, she was a student at Strixhaven. Yeah.
Spoilers for like later discussions as well. Like in the Witherbloom side story, like Dina is looking for an ingredient for a spell, which I'll talk about later. And she's like, maybe I can't get it on this plane. Maybe I would have to travel to a different plane to get it. And like, she knows this. So they just understand planeswalking exists here.
It's not really a surprise. So that's probably one of the reasons why it's not really all that mysterious to see people like Kor or Owlin or wherever. Strixhaven seems to be one of the most, I guess, race diverse planes we've been to, which is pretty interesting. So returning to the story, so Luca is here. He just kind of appears. He arrives out of nowhere and is hungry, and he's basically hangry, and he is hangry when he walks into some of the local villages, and immediately is kind of like coarse and rude to the locals who ask him like, oh, where you're from. He's just like, I want food. And because of the dynamics between Strixhaven and their control and domain over how magic should be taught and how magic should be practiced, and also the fact that Luca is wearing presumably his Ikoria clothing, the locals basically take him for an Auric recruiter, chase him out of town. And Luca does his Luca thing where he starts mind controlling various animals in order to defend him. So dogs, horses, wolves, a bear shows up. And as he wanders around being chased out of town, he meets a really cute fox who brings him some nuts and berries. They hang out. He decides to accept her as his new bondmate, which is something that we previously saw on Ikoria with him and that really sweet tiger, unfortunately. And he actually runs into a fight between the Dragon Guards, which are basically kind of like almost like the FBI of this world in terms of tracking down rogue magic users, aka the Auric, and some Auric agents themselves. And after getting involved in this fight, again summoning lots of animals, he ends up following the Auric back to their headquarters. So yeah, that's Luca. That's how he's here. There's really no mention of like where he's been or if this is where he lands directly after he planeswalked and he'd sparked off of Ikoria. So it's a little bit of a what are you doing here? What is happening? But I suppose sometimes this happens in Magic stories, so this is not exactly unprecedented.
They're setting it up for later. I'd like to see Luca have a showdown with Vivian because I feel like they have very different attitudes to animal companionship.
Vivian has made it one of her personal. I feel like Vivian has like an Arya Stark kind of list. Nicol Bolas was at the top, and Luca is definitely on that list, especially since they did have kind of an altercation on Ikoria in in the Sundered Bond, and which was Django Wexler's story from Ikoria last year. But I would love to see a one-on-one battle, and I would put all my money on Vivian for sure. So continuing with the Liliana story, the University of Strixhaven, the 5 different colleges are actually founded by 5 different elder dragons. We don't really get too much into them in this story, but we do get a little bit of insight into Bellatrix Witherbloom, the founder of Witherbloom College. Presumably, given her powers of necromancy, I think Liliana is pretty much the falls into this college, and so she essentially just goes into the swamp to hang out, to basically find this dragon and to ask them if they have any idea how to possibly revive Gideon. It's a bit of a sentimental and definitely emotional story, like that little snippet there when Liliana comes to talk to this dragon, because obviously Liliana's necromancer. She knows how to bring some things back to some kind of unlife, but given her guilt and given the debt that she feels towards Gideon, she can't actually revive him. So that is the main reason why she's here. And while the deans of the school and whatnot are in charge and very knowledgeable, obviously the founding dragons would be the best repository of knowledge. Unfortunately, the dragon Witherbloom says, nope, we don't touch that magic. I'm not going to show it to you. It's not going to work the way you think it's going to work. And Liliana ends up leaving empty-handed, but Witherbloom actually gives her a really interesting piece of advice, which I think is going to set the tone for Liliana's arc going forward, which is sometimes the best way to honor the dead is reflected in the way you treat the living. So I think that's a really wise piece of advice, and I think that's going to be very like a key character point for Liliana going forward. I mean, before War of the Spark, she was this sort of femme fatale anti-hero sort of character. It should be interesting to see how she evolves going forward.
Right. Like, I always enjoyed the interpretation of the Orphic myth as being kind of a funerary metaphor, right? That when somebody close to us dies, we all kind of like go into the underworld with them. And then you have to learn how to come back without. Right. So, you can't fix this by reanimating Gideon. You're going to have to like.
We saw that San Diego Comic-Con version. Yeah. We know what that looks like, and it's not pretty.
Yeah, it's like I know how you want to handle this, and it's not going to get you what you want on any axis. Right? This isn't how you get closure with somebody's choice.
And seriously, she's literally already tried this once, and it didn't work out well the first time.
Yes. And I think that's an interesting way of recalling that first, of like repeating that theme of someone died. Like I think in some ways, we're dealing with Liliana's guilt, and I always have I've kind of formulated this opinion that like guilt is such a white-black emotion, in the sense that it's inherently tied to the reality, the fact that you made a mistake, and that society, towards society and towards the greater community in which you live with. But it's an inherently selfish sort of emotion, because it's sort of, you're very fixated on how you're feeling. And it's not a super active or useful emotion. And so I find it really interesting that to see how both, I think I did write like an article for this in Card Kingdom about Gideon and his guilt, but I think Liliana also reflects a lot of that. And it's been very interesting to see how both of these characters are dealing with this very complex emotion.
Right.
Gideon was basically just like, I'm just going to yeet myself at everything, including Nicol Bolas, and that will assuage my guilt. And Liliana is basically like, okay, how do I bring him back to life because
Right.
this was wrong.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Guilt is a inherently kind of social emotion, right? You can't feel guilt if you don't feel attachment to other people.
Mm.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's again just not the most productive emotion to feel, even if it's a
Right.
valid
Right.
feeling to have, but it's not productive because it at the end of the day is so self-centered.
Mhm.
And I don't mean that in like a bad way necessarily. It's just it is centered on your mistake and what you have done.
Right. And like,
Mhm.
hopefully, maybe you can transmute that into something that can uh, be iterated upon, or you can have growth from something like, well, grief,
Mhm.
Mm.
right?
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways, this the storyline for Liliana in Strixhaven touches a little bit on that, but I guess it's a good point for us to move forward because we do see some interesting, some growth here in Liliana's character that I think is both in keeping with who she is, while also sort of trans, I guess, transitioning to something a little bit more new, which is pretty cool.
Okay.
I like growth in characters. It would be kind of shitty if Gideon died and Liliana was like, well, back to being rude and manipulating people.
All the zombies for me. Yeah, no, that wouldn't be terribly interesting.
Hmm.
Um, so, so Liliana goes back and she continues to do her professorial stuff. She teaches classes. Speaking of which, the twins, Will and Rowan Kenrith, they basically start settling into university, into college life, in the best way we would know any red aligned and blue aligned person to be. So Will is hitting those books. He's studying. He's having a great time, like learning how to control and develop his magic. Whereas Rowan is really excited to basically show off what she can do, and in many ways having a little bit of competition. And a lot of other folks to show off for, like she manages to push her power a little bit as well. So both of them, in terms of their magical abilities, do progress, which is really, really cool. Um, However, since Rowan is constantly a bookworm and is an academic kind of inclined, academically inclined individual, he's doing well, whereas Rowan's like slacking off.
Hmm.
This inevitably causes tension between the two, and I think this makes sense given what we've seen before in like Kate Elliott's um, short story novella. About the two of them. The name escapes me at the moment, but we have seen in the past that Will and Rowan are very much devoted to each other. They share a spark, but they also have very different personalities. And I think this is actually a very logical progression for them as young adults entering a space that's filled with other young adults
Mm.
with similar abilities and similar kinds of magic. So it is, I think, also a good reflection of what it's like to be in college when you're like, okay, I have a lot more freedom now. You know, this is how I choose to devote my time and my energy,
Hmm. Mhm.
free of responsibility. Well, free of like the kind of, well, I guess in this case, Rowan and Will, their responsibility on Eldraine would be, oh, well, we are the kids of the High King, so we need to not mess things up so much. But here, you know, they're treated as not royalty, which is, I think, a very good place for them to be in at the moment as they're experimenting with them with how to use their magic and how to and who to make friends with. And I think
Mm.
that's really telling here too. Like Rowan keeps hanging out with the Witherbloom kids, and she's like with the Prismari, constantly shooting off lightning bolts, and Will is like hitting the books with Quintorius
Hmm.
all the time. So it's really it's pretty cute, except for the fact that it does cause them to start fighting with each other, like in a magic way. And Professor Onyx, aka Liliana, has been keeping an eye on them for a while, so she just grabs them and is like, "Knock it off! You have a brother, like you have each other. That's something that means something."
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think coming from Liliana in her past, I think that's a surprisingly heartfelt thing to say. Um, and she also tells them about the Auric, um, and her suspicions that they're actually going to make a comeback given her previous experience in the library with this random person who tried to kill her.
Right. So the
Mhm.
Auric are rogue mages
Yep.
that have flunked out, essentially, or been driven out of Strixhaven.
They're basically anti-establishment
Mhm.
individuals. They're in a lot of ways they're I would describe their the way that they're portrayed in the story is almost like a terrorist organization, at least in the media, in like the mass pop media sense,
Okay.
where they are known to not only practice magic on their own terms. I mean, they're very, like I said, they're very anti-establishment in that way, but they also are driven. They also like antagonize the local population, and they are willing to do whatever they can in order to essentially not only show up the establishment but completely obliterate it.
Hmm.
Um, and that's basically what the first Auric agent we see. Their mission in the Biblioplex is to find something that can essentially take down Strixhaven and the whole institution of magic within our this plane.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. They
Mhm.
show up in the side stories, not quite with that much of a mission, but just with the goal of like recruiting people and like, getting and then, just doing perfect. That's a story beat. Paul, you're
Yep.
so good at your job.
Hmm.
Tempted by the Auric. Although this happens in a bathroom in the story, I think. So
Yeah,
that's
this
why.
happens in a bathroom, and it's his friend, and she kind of weirdly drugs him, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but they're all just like, no, come with us, and they, and we'll do real magic, the good stuff, and do whatever you want, and you don't have to. You can be free, and it's just like you sound like like an anarchist. You sound like an anarchist terrorist in like a Wes Anderson movie, almost to me, right? Like,
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's
Oh,
it
that's
sounds a
interesting.
yeah, it's I exactly. It's got that kind of pop culture media kind of understanding of like if you've seen The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Carly Morgenthau and her whole group. It's very this is like type a
Hmm.
textbook essentially.
This is not a story the Jedi would tell you.
No, no, it would not be that. These are, yeah, they are. They're basically the Sith. Let's be real here.
Right.
They're
It's like,
essentially the
have you
Sith.
heard the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Ah, yeah. Give in to the anger. It gives you strength. But yeah, so the twins are made aware of the Auric, and of course, each of them decides to deal with that information the way that they personally want to know how. So Will's just like, oh, I'm going to go find more spells in order to,
Hmm.
um, try to outwit and have more resources on hand, intellectually speaking. Whereas Rowan's like, I'm just going to learn how to punch things better with lightning. And they're both like, okay, I guess that's what we're going to do.
Hmm.
Twins walk away in opposite directions. Exit stage left, exit stage right.
Right. The
oh
two
no,
vastly incompatible fields of theory and practice.
mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Famously incompatible. Don't need each
Oh,
other at all.
no, not at all. So in the meantime, we switch back to Luca. Um, so Kasmina has
She's here
essentially
too.
she's
Sorry.
here too. Yeah, no, it's really interesting because Kasmina's role in the story is less of an active participant and more an observer slash like passive reaction kind of individual. Like she's the one that essentially provides almost she's like the camera person, right? She's like, we switch to camera B, my owl B. It's like I can just imagine
Ah,
her sitting at a console with like a bunch of owls and a bunch of TV screens being like, okay, we're switching to owl A, owl B, and owl C. And this is a theme that continues throughout the stories. But
right. Yeah.
and the owls are implied to not be actual owls.
Hmm.
They're implied to be some kind of construct. Um, but yeah, so she continues spying on Luca from afar, and Luca formally joins the Auric because reasons.
Because of course he does. He's a huge idiot.
But the thing that the story doesn't really get into is why? Like,
Right.
I get that he's he gets onto this plane, he's hangry, everyone treats him poorly, but I don't feel like that is enough of an impetus to have him join this anarchist terrorist organization.
Do they sweet
Um,
talk him?
Extus is like, hello, we should talk. And then what's interesting is that the way the story is told is that we don't actually get any of the dialogue between Extus and Luca. The owl observes Extus and Luca having a conversation. We don't know what that is. Extus pulls out a mask and is like, "Hey, you want a mask?" And Lucas says, shakes his head, and then he changes his features to look more like Mila, his fox. And then I guess that's supposed to be his mask, or like that's supposed to be his connection to the Auric. Because shortly thereafter, Luca notices, like, he clocks the owl, and he's like, Casmina. So he follows the owl, and then he and Casmina have like a um, have essentially a confrontation. And basically what Luca brings to the Auric is his ability to control animals and animalistic creatures, such as the Mage Hunters. So, Mage Hunters are these really big praying mantis sliver-looking creatures covered in
Right.
chitinous plate armor, that are in the stories portrayed as kind of almost being like dormant. Um,
Hmm.
and for some, I think they are somewhat of a naturally occurring thing, but it is also like suggested that they um, have been enhanced and trained a little bit by the Auric in order to be better at hunting mages. They are a little bit more resilient, and they're able to handle magical blasts a lot more easily. And basically, Luca is able to control them. So that's what Luca brings to the table. Once again, I don't really understand why he's here, given his background in Ikoria. It's so weird that he wants to bring down this establishment, considering his past
Hmm.
with General Kudrow and whatnot. There's a little bit of a attempt in the story to sort of draw a comparison between the magical institutions and regulations of Strixhaven with the very strict um, rules and character of General Kudrow within the Sundered Bond. But having read both stories, I don't really see as much of a connection, if at all, honestly.
Right.
Um,
Like it doesn't sound like Luca has really visited Strixhaven at this point.
I think the first time he visits Strixhaven is when he basically amasses this army of mage hunters and literally attacks it. Like that's when his first time. So his whole thing is to create a diversion on campus. One of the things that is very unique about Strixhaven campus is the fact that there are about 5 to 6 different snarls. So snarls are basically like magic mana, like nexuses. If you think about like ley lines or
Hmm.
something like that, and where ley lines meet, you have like a big energy power thing. Like if you watch Charmed or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
There we go.
Hmm.
So the most powerful snarl is actually located underneath the biblioplex, which is kind of funny because that's where we first started off the story. And the mage hunters that Luca is leading are basically trying to drive the teachers, the faculty, etc., away from the biblioplex so that the rest of the Auric can infiltrate the biblioplex, grab the book they need, and get down to the basement.
Hmm.
Now, Will and Rowan get woken up by all this hubbub and commotion, and of course, the siblings find each other and they're like, "Okay, we're going to stick with each other." And Will says, "We should go to the library to like see if we can find anything that can help defend us." And Rowan says, that makes sense. Let's do it.
Hmm.
Along the way, they meet Liliana, who realizes that this is actually a huge distraction. She sees through Luca's ploy immediately and runs down to the Biblioplex herself. That she meets up with the twins. Even though the twins are kids, she's like, well, I need all the power I can get on my side, so you're coming with me. And
Classic black mage.
Classic black mage, just use what you can.
Mm-hmm.
You're here anyway. It's not like I'm going to stop you. We have bigger issues. And they descend into the Snarl, which is essentially located in the Hall of Oracles, which is basically kind of like almost like the greats of Strixhaven. There are various statues of the most illustrious alumnus of Strixhaven. And this is where Extus starts doing his thing, which is essentially summoning a blood avatar. It's not been mentioned before what a blood avatar is, what they do, where they come from, why they have 4 arms.
I assume this is what they were trying to make in Blade. And until I see some like evidence to the contrary, that's going to be like my mental touchstone for a blood avatar.
Arcavios has other avatars though wandering around, like the big 4-armed things that are wandering out in the wilderness, but they're like much more like chill.
Right, and
they're
is
chill.
Frequent reference to the Blood Age,
Yeah.
which sounds like a rough era.
This sounds like the plot of a Fire Emblem game. We've got to awaken the old avatar that we had to destroy with the last Fire Emblem. So now we need to refine the Fire Emblem and kill this thing through turn-based combat. Right?
And I would have appreciated, I think, some reference to what this was before. I mean, it's entirely possible that more of this was covered in the B plot, which Kathleen, I'm sure you'll dive into. Okay, never mind. My bad. So Extus summons this blood avatar. He appears. In the meantime, Liliana is hit with a teleportation spell, which blinks her basically to the other side of the continent. And she's just like, well, hope the twins do okay. and then the twins, they remember a spell, which is basically control magic from a mage tower tournament they saw, which is kind of like capture the flag, but with mascots, and you can use magic. Yeah. They try individually to take down the blood avatar. I mean, turns out no matter how much power Rowan has, if you can't focus it, it's not going to help. But Will, on the other hand, is knocked out. So once he comes to, he suggests that they use essentially a control magic spell, and Rowan feeds him the power that he needs in order to lock the spell into place. And once that happens, the blood avatar literally squishes Extus. And then Will unfortunately loses a little bit of focus, which causes the blood avatar to flail around wildly before being pulled back from whence it came. But at the last minute, that giant, I think the sword comes down and just takes Will's leg off at the knee, which is unfortunate. And at some point, Luca, as he's got the Mage Hunters out, the dragons, the founding dragons come by, and turns out a bunch of scary looking bugs versus lots of big elder dragons. Not great. So he just sort of runs away with his fox and the rest of the Auric agents into the night. And that's literally the last we see of him.
Right. Like, okay. Thanks,
Yeah, he's
Luca.
just like,
good job.
Bye. And afterwards, the twins, they're reunited, they recover. Will makes his own prosthetic out of ice and steel, and they decide to continue their studies at Strixhaven. In the meantime, Liliana, after all this, decides maybe the best thing I should do is maybe stop pretending to be a Pokemon professor, and returns to her original name of Liliana Vess at the school. And
but she's still teaching there and hanging out?
She's still teaching there and hanging out. So I think that's probably a really interesting development for her. I think that makes sense. And
Right.
she is extremely knowledgeable after all, and I think helping a younger generation of people learn how to not be so dumb is absolutely in keeping. I think it both is in keeping with her personality, but also in keeping with what she thinks Gideon would do. I mean, Gideon is the kind of person who would, if he had like a YouTube exercise channel, respond to everyone's comments like in a really positive manner.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Liliana would be like, "No, your form's off. You need to
Well,
stop."
it sounds like Liliana's being set up for the mentor arc,
Mm.
Yes,
right?
which
Like,
makes me worried because we all know what happens to mentor characters.
yeah, she'll come back white aligned after fighting Rakdos,
Yes,
right?
or she'll
Like
come back as
Gandalf.
a ghost.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Oh, and then her and Kaya can team up. I bet that would be very fun for
that would
Kaya.
be very fun.
Yeah, I'm seeing a
Yes.
whole line of merchandise based on this, like this arc for Liliana. It's very
Yeah.
exciting.
But yeah,
Um,
that's basically everything that happens. I don't really understand plot wise why Kasmina and Luca had to be there. I mean, we had seen Kasmina before in War of the Spark, and we were led to believe like, oh, this is actually like a feeder school to create planeswalkers. That was something that was mentioned in the past. It was a little bit tidbit of lore from War of the Spark, but we don't see any of that here.
Hmm.
And she doesn't really do very much. There's a really sweet looking card where she's throwing up a shield as Luca tries to punch her. But honestly, other than that, she really doesn't have very much to do with the plot.
Hmm.
And, you know, like as we keep saying, Luca, why?
Right.
I mean, I guess this is for things that are happening down the line. We have to remind people that Luca and Kasmina exist, and it's easy to do so by making them tangentially related.
Right.
That's true.
So, like, basically, what I'm getting is that Luca is an easily manipulated. Uh,
Idiot?
yeah. Uh,
But this is in keeping with, I mean, the thing about Luca is that his background is basically defending humans and humanity against essentially the kaiju in Ikoria, and
hmm.
he had been doing so for a while. People who were bonded with these various um, behemoths were considered to be anathema, and suddenly him having that ability created, I think, like a weird identity rift within himself,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of within the Sundered Bond, there's a lot of denial in Luca's character. He is constantly trying to make things normal. He wants his old position as General Kudra's right-hand man back. He
Mm.
wants to get back together with General Kudra's daughter slash his girlfriend. And he is willing to do whatever it takes to do it, which is why he decides to align himself with the Ozolith in order to make that
Hmm.
happen. Um, and so that's sort of what is a bit odd to me about his portrayal in this arc, because in the Sundered Bond, he's driven very much by a desire, almost by nostalgia, right?
Right.
In order
Okay.
to keep things the way they are, where he is in control, where his self image is not challenged, and where the company he keeps and the society he maintains is as it was,
Hmm.
and he can't seem to accept who he is now.
Well,
Whereas here, it's a little different. Sorry, Cam.
it sounds like in the Ikoria storyline, he was a character with an agenda and wants and desires, and then did things to obtain that, right? And like, you can't have it. You can totally have characters who make bad decisions, right? Because like, I've enjoyed reading about authors talking about their characters and trying to imagine, like, okay, what if I had all the information this character had and I wanted the things that they had? What would be the worst possible decision I could make in this moment? I'll write that. Um, but like in Strixhaven, it sounds like he's mainly here to give kind of like a player, or a point of view into the Auric,
Hmm.
rather than being somebody with wants and needs and an agenda and autonomy.
But the problem, I mean, I think that was definitely the intention, but the problem is that we never really even got to see any deep, any kind of philosophical conversation between Luca
Mm-hmm.
and Extus, right?
Mm.
Like I said before, the moment he decides to join the Auric, we don't even see that conversation. We see
Right,
the
it's
conversation, but we don't hear it. Like there are no
yeah,
words.
it's
It's just
elided
like,
from us, right?
yeah, it's just like, you want this mask? Nah, I got my own. Fox time.
Right.
So it's not as well developed as I think I would have liked, but Luca is
It's-
also not the smartest character. So
Mm.
No, I am being a bit mean to him, I think, but like I'm having trouble buying if you're a law and order character, why the first thing you do upon going to a new plane is to team up with some people who are like, yeah, let's take down the system. It's like, wouldn't you want to see what the system was since you previously quite enjoyed that?
Yeah, like you would think at some point your question would be like, okay, so Strixhaven is what again? It's like it's a school, right?
With children in
With
it.
children.
Okay.
Okay, what's your thing? Well, we want to blow it up and then eat all of the students with bugs.
and summon this big blood demon to tear down the school with children inside.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm
Um,
listening. I'm listening. The blood demon, is it made out of children's blood or is the blood already like
It's like an amalgamation, we've got like
okay.
type O, we've got type A, we've got AB, type B, we just put it all together in one big avatar and send it forth.
I'm listening. I'm
Yeah.
listening.
Yeah. It's a blood type, what's the word? It doesn't really care about blood type. It just is all the blood types.
Right. Some kind of omni blood.
Yeah, omni blood. Yeah.
It's actually donor plasma, so anyone can take it.
Ooh.
Yeah. That's really the true agenda of the org, is just like the blood banks of Arcadius have been terrible. We're going to get this blood avatar to really get those supplies back in line.
Yeah.
Oh, if only.
If only it made that much sense.
So okay. So the blood
Paul.
avatar is defeated.
Yes.
Will loses his leg and makes his own prosthetic. Liliana reclaims her name and decides to step fully into her role as a professor. And Luca and the Auric are driven off into the wilderness, never to be heard from again.
I mean, Extus did get quite smushed, so
Yeah.
that probably helps.
Which I assume sets Luca up to be the new leader of the Auric?
I mean, he can definitely set bears on people. So given that kind of a CV, I'd say that makes him a fairly good contender.
Yeah, you would think bears would be pretty resilient against mage hunters, too, considering bears don't really cast spells.
I mean, who knows? They're only 2/2s though, so I mean, they can't get too far.
True.
Yeah.
Speaking of tutus,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about the side stories, which feature at least one tutu.
Please,
I see what you did there. I
Yeah,
see what you did. That segue just kind of.
It was a long walk. The segue was longer than just a direct translation.
Buttery smooth, buttery smooth. We'll cut this entire thing out, Graham. And
So I'm not going to get into quite as much detail with the B plot because there's less there. So there's 5 B plot stories, one for each college, and the first one is about Rutha, and it is about Rutha is a 5th generation. Okay, so literally my notes until I stopped taking them for everyone said, this X person is not like the other students. It's like literally how you could sum them all up. But of course,
Yes.
they are uncommons, so that makes sense. But Rutha is a 5th generation Prismari person. Like her mother is a very famous artist, but she's got like wild magic inside her, and it causes her a lot of angst for a variety of reasons. But then she gets over it by creating something with Nasiri.
So it's kind of a story of self-acceptance. I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's doing like traditional, like, oh God, this is not my passion. This is not my vision that I am seeing. It's terrible. It's crap. It's awful. Ugh. And it's just like, well, stop trying to make that stuff and make stuff that speaks to you, basically.
So Rutha is like really struggling against the first year fine arts experience of drawing draperies for 30 hours.
Correct. Yes, that is exactly the point.
I relate. I'm not necessarily in drawing, but I remember when I started pottery, it was basically like, what is everyone else doing? I guess I'm just making a lot of this for a really long time. Oh, and then you discover something and then kind of fall into it. So I can relate to that. I understand. Like when I discovered what my sort of niche in my artistic endeavor was, I think that was a huge relief. So now I make screaming possums on mugs, and that's kind of what I like to do.
It's compelling content.
Yeah, I think by the end of the story, Rutha finds her own screaming possum.
May we all, really.
May we all find our screaming possum.
Mm-hmm.
He's scrammed own ass. Yes.
It's, a familiar, really.
Yes.
Let's see, who's the next story? I'm actually going to skip to I'm going to skip to Quintorius' story because it's not really all that plot related, as is neither Rutha's. Quintorius is not like the other students. He's been thrown out of military school, and he comes from a poor background, so he's got to work to pay his tuition. And he's constantly worried that he's going to screw it up, and he's like wanting to work very hard. And you get paired up with these stone mentors. And that basically they're the spirits of other people that if they can conjure up, if they can find a statue of them. But his mentor just wants to talk about like food and good dogs and like all his romantic conquests. Like I'm trying to think who it's like, I'm trying to think of what celebrity it is, but it might be like your cartoon imagination of Chris Hemsworth is what.
Oh, no.
Right? So he sucks. Or like Quintorius thinks he sucks and is just like super bummed out because he doesn't want to get a bad grade because this is a group project, but he's the only one putting in work.
I wouldn't mind hanging out with the statue of Chris Hemsworth. Just putting it out there. He seems cool. He made a really epic cake for his daughter.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe more like Chris Hemsworth's character from Ghostbusters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The
Yeah.
very attractive himbo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, himbo. But like himbos are fun, and just because you're a himbo doesn't mean you don't have good lived experience. And it turns out that his mentor does, and they turn out to very easily find an amazing lost city of the Loxodon people. Hooray for Quintorius.
Oh.
Like that's it.
And then
It takes them half an hour.
Oh my god.
It's not dangerous. Like they get one minor sidetrack, and then they're like, "Oh, look, we did it."
Okay, I have a couple of friends who were archaeologists, and I'm just gonna have to ping them in. Like, so how long did it take you to find a lost city?
It turns out, even though this is like the super explored, super like combed over, like nobody had thought to do this in this particular spot, that a door opens and you can climb down and see a giant golden elephant, and it's all very exciting.
I mean, sometimes it's okay to just go and have adventures.
Yes. I didn't mind it as a story. I thought it was quite fun, but like I'm just summing up what happens. Let's see. But then we actually there's like 3 stories that are more related to the plot, sort of. So the first one that I'm going completely out of order is we got to talk about Zimone. And she's not like the other students at Strixhaven because she is a child prodigy, and her mother her grandmother, I'm sorry, was also a very, very famous Strixhaven Quandrix mage, but she at some point something happened to her mind and she left, and it's all very terrible, and Zimone her parents don't talk to her about her grandmother at all, but her grandmother starts sending her numbers of ribbons secretly for her birthday, and she's at Strixhaven and she gets 373, and so she's kept them all and puts them into this long braid. She doesn't know what to do with them, but once she finds out her grandmother was a Strixhaven student, because all this information's been kept from her, she starts doing research, and eventually she figures out what her grandmother was working at with some grand unsolvable query, and there you go, solve the equation. There. And so she manages to figure out what this grand unsolvable query is. And apparently it's such arcane, terrible knowledge that, says that her grandmother had to wipe her own memory so she couldn't give it to the Auric, which immediately attracts the attention of the Auric. And then she's rescued sort of from out of nowhere, and the Auric leave her alone. The end.
They decide to kidnap this child and take her away. And we do get to see a little bit of her connection with her grandmother at the very end.
That's true.
Which was nice. And I also appreciated, I think Shibam actually pointing this out. Hey, what's up, Shibam? That the way this is written was very Nigerian. And the phrasing, the prose was very much like Igbo. So
right, yeah, it's an Igbo author, isn't it?
It's an Igbo. Yeah, he's an Igbo author, and so I felt like that perspective was pretty cool. I like 2 thumbs up. We need more of that for sure.
I think I'm not really here to talk about the writing. I'm here to talk about the plots and how they relate to the story, to the magic as a whole. But I think this one was my favorite one to read.
Yeah, I thought it was a well written one for sure. Yeah.
So if you're going to read one, this one's not a bad one to start with, and it's not super long, and it's interesting. So she solves this grand equation, and and her grandmother's mind is gone, but she eventually gets some closure by going and talking to her. But and then that seems to be about it, right? She goes back to normal after that.
Okay. Does it ever give us any insight into what the grand query was?
It's basically a source of limitless power, and the Auric would like to use it so they can, do bad things, essentially.
Apply it to get more blood for the blood avatar.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if it's anything like any of the other limitless forms of power I've seen in academia, it's five years away from production. Right? Like, there's some engineering problems. We're not going to tell you there aren't engineering problems. There are, but we're confident that engineers will be able to solve them in about 5 years.
I'm just imagining Elon Musk showing, like, the Auric shows up and then pulls back his head. It's Elon Musk. Zimone, give me the power. Give me the secret to unlimited power. We shall use it to summon the blood avatar. Also, better cars and SpaceX.
I like that a lot of the students have good relationships with their teachers. All the teachers, most of the students seem to have good relationships with their teachers. All the teachers generally seem very wanting to help. Which I think is nice. But let's get on to the 2 stories that I would say are the most connected to the main plot and to each other. They're holding hands. Is Dina and Killian's story. Perhaps maybe they will in fact one day hold hands. It is rumored that may happen. I feel like that is hinted that may happen. So Dina is not like the other students on Strixhaven. She doesn't go to like all the cool parties and stuff. She's super good friends with her professor. She's that kid because she is a dryad and she is an orphan. Because her whole grove has been wiped out by brittle blight, which is some sort of Arcavian condition that kills natural things. Like even the bugs just die of ennui. I cannot be bothered to chitter anymore. And so
the entire place just turns black and white. There's accordion music playing. They start smoking cigarettes.
Essentially, it's very dark. So she gets rescued by Lisette and taken to Strixhaven. And by the way, dryads normally on Arcavius do not wear clothes. They just frolic. They're trees, right? They don't need to wear clothes, but they wear clothes on Strixhaven. This fact is dispensed in this story, and it was one of my favorite facts to learn.
Well, that's very social of them.
Yeah, very, very understanding to our fleshy needs. But anyhow, so what she is trying to do is she has found a book on resurrection in the biblioplex. It called to her, and it promises life from lifelessness, and it's written by somebody who seems extremely intense, and she's found this very dark recipe, and she's gotten all this stuff, and the only thing she needs is like this one Essus root, but she can't find it, and so she's like, maybe this is a plant that used to be called Essus root but is no longer, or something like that. And she even like I said, is like, maybe I have to go to a different plane to get it, and sort of researches it and realizes that's not possible. Like, you can't do that. You would die or be in agony or something. But then she just sees it in Professor Onyx's class. So she just steals some, and she's like, mixes up her potion. She's like, all right, sick, I'm going to test it here. And if this works, I'm taking it back to the grove and I'm going to bring my whole family. Dryads don't have typical families, but I'm bringing my whole family back to life. And she's in the middle of doing that, and it's all going to be great. And then she gets interrupted because Killian Lou is in detention bog, which is a real thing you can be sent to in Strixhaven, detention bog. And he is having a tantrum because he is flinging around ink magic everywhere because his dad sent him to detention because he lost at Mage Tower because his dad sucks ass so hard.
We'll get into it.
Yeah.
We'll get into it. Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Anyhow, this interrupts. This is the story where the most stuff happens. This interrupts Dina's spellcasting, and instead of like killing and reviving some pests, this makes a huge blob monster thing that goes on a rampage and is starting to like run, and it's like living bog. So anyhow, so they have to go and chase it down, and they find out as they're walking side by side to try and figure out what's going on that both of them have lost family members, so they have common ground. So that's why it's okay that they like each other, because they've got one thing in common.
And that's a lot for
Yeah,
give it a shot.
I mean, if there's one thing that's intensely attractive, it's somebody throwing a tantrum.
Yeah.
Angst is super. I mean, have you not been to Hot Topic? Like,
I guess
really
Wuthering
hot.
Heights like landed, right?
The Bronte sisters were the first, for sure, the first emo kids.
They both have they both have the black, and their color identity is just emo for both of them, I think.
Yeah.
Because they're both like, oh. But anyhow, so they almost defeat it, sort of. And then Killian is almost going to do it, but he's showing off and like still like yelling about his dad while he's doing it. It's like, oh my God, I'd be like, can you please focus on defeating the giant monster that you are in fact responsible for creating? Anyhow, so he gets hurt, and then Dina's like, oh no. And then Dina gets swallowed by this whole like big maw, and it's really, really gross. This is not that scene, actually. This is after another scene, but we'll get to that. Anyhow, and then she goes on like a mind journey and is like, oh, I can just can just go and extract my own magic from this because the spell's powered by a drop of her own blood. But also she realizes that she just sort of talks to like the mind version of her mother tree, not actually her mother, because dryads don't have mothers in that way. The story's pretty specific about that, so I feel like I want to pass that on. And it's like, I don't think people want this. And she's like, yeah, that's a good point. Maybe that's not something that they would enjoy, being brought back to life. Okay, cool. And appears to get over it. So anyhow, but then she gets hurt, and then they're rescued through Deus Ex Machina, and they're fine. And then after all of that settles down, Lisette takes the book that Dina had been reading over to Professor Onyx's office and is like, I assume you're looking for this? I know who you are. Don't be like shitty here. Rah. And Liliana's like, okay. And as soon as Lisette leaves, she's like, yes, my old book that I wrote. Boy, this didn't work out. Huh. And then like destroys it. So, oh my God, that intense person who had a lot of life and death issues was Liliana the whole time.
Who could have seen that coming?
I don't. Oh God.
It's fun that you mentioned the Essus root, because that was the ingredient that she got from the Raven. She revived using the life essences of witches, using necromancy taught to her by the Raven Man, in order to revive her brother. So. Yeah, that's like a deep callback to magic origins.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I actually I thought this story was pretty good.
Yeah, I liked this one. Other than like Killian being a brat. I mean, I get it. He's angsty and he's a teenager. So like, yes, but.
Yeah. But speaking of Killian, by the way, nobody suffered. Lots of the kids do really bad things that they are not supposed to do in these stories, and no one suffers a single consequence ever. They just get a stern talking to from their professors who say, no, do better next time. So it really is like Magic High School, right?
Right.
But speaking of which... Oh, go ahead, Cameron.
Like the conversation where it's like, now, we know what we've had that conversation about trying to do things that are just a little ahead of where you are. Don't let me catch you again.
Be hidden better next time.
Yeah.
But it's time for Killian's story. Killian, there are some problems with this story.
Killian is also not like any other student.
Yeah.
Here in Strixhaven.
His dad's the dean.
which is flavor text and art will remind you again and again and again that he is in fact the only son of Dean Ambrose, who is the other dean of Silver Quill, one of the colleges, the one that deals with language arts. Yeah. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Oh, well, so anyhow, Silver Quill is, as usual, a college of assholes and psychopaths, because it sort of like starts in media res as Killian is having a rude words duel, but magic rude words, obviously, with one of his professors who's like going way too hard and like actually hurting people. Like Killian needs to go to the infirmary afterwards, and then his dad responds to Killian not beating his professor, even though he's only a student, and getting hurt by making him do more things that hurt him. So so there's all of these different like ways to cast spells, but they're talking about one of them is like the volume at which you speak. And so Killian is supposed to be mastering his volume to control his magic in this duel. And he basically ratchets his throat. And his dad, instead of like giving him some like pipaqua or like some hot lemon honey water, is
just
like,
give him a Ricola. Just give him some Ricola.
Yeah, his dad's like, all right, well, now keep like reciting these battle poems until you can barely speak, because it's not like your instrument is your voice as a Silver Quill mage. You'll get over it. It's just so stupid and awful. Oh, and also Killian has like a cute inkling. Apparently, inklings aren't just things you summon to throw at people. They have names and personalities. As his inkling's name is Daco, and he's not allowed to use him because that would bring him joy.
That is literally the reason. It just makes him happy. It gives him I don't know. It gives him like the amount of empathy that is not okay for a Lou. Also, I would like to. Sorry, Paul. Can we go back to the previous card, Crushing Disappointment? I would like to present Asian dad meme.
Yeah.
Number 546. Why you study C++? Why not A+? Yeah. Also it's just, there's a lot of problems with this story, and with Killian as well. I mean, I've spoken about this a lot, but Kathleen, you should continue your synopsis.
Well, okay. So it goes on, and Killian's like eventually is like, oh, bust this. I can't do this anymore. And but previously to showing up to his dad yelling at him for existing, essentially, he does run into Quintorius in the library, who gives him a library book that is, from the stacks, that is about a lumimancer, however you would say it, which is about like the white magic side of Silver Quill. And they're talking about, and then they use a very, very poor choice of words. They say, they refer to this previous student who wrote a book as the mute, which is somebody who can't speak. And it's not a very sensitive way to refer to that, unfortunately. But anyhow, the point being, the book has spells in sign language, which is immediately relevant because, of course, Killian has now blown out his throat. But it's only white magic spells, and his dad doesn't want him to practice white magic. Because, you don't need to. No mercy should ever be shown to anybody. You should only use black magic. It's more efficient, right? So, anyhow, he eventually gets sick of this, and decides to leave. And he catches up with a girl he knows from class who has been needling him about like actually going out and seeing other people and not studying all the time. And it turns out, they go to the bar, which is called the Bow's End. That's important. Not really. I just remembered that. I liked it as a bar name.
Hmm.
And lo and behold, he sees Dina there, who's on a date for the third time or something with some big green creature, essentially. And of course, because, all in relationships between men and women are sexual and there can be no friendship immediately, this is makes her companion get grumpy at Killian, even though Killian is also there with another like Silver Quill student. Like it clearly looks like he's there on a date to meet somebody else that he doesn't even know Dina's going to be there. They're just like, hey, how's it going? Right. It's so ridiculous. So he's like, goes to talk to this other person. He's like, and she's like, here, let me get you a drink. And he's like, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then he gets challenged to a duel by the other guy. And then everybody is like, is like, duel, 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 have a duel, because the other guy thinks that he's there to date Dina because he's an idiot. And they have a duel, and then they're doing it, and Killian gets completely carried away during the duel, and he's going way too hard. And he's like, oh, crap. Oh, no, what am I going to do? I actually don't want to kill this guy. Oh, no. And he's like starting to like panic because he can't, his voice is completely gone now. So let me read you a passage. All right. The time to save Vicus, who's the stupid guy, was running short. With no voice and no other alternative, Killian again retrieved the tale of the person who could not speak from his robes and opened its pages. He's just flipping through this book in the duel, of course. Dako, of the same mind and eagerly awaiting his opportunity to help, sprang into action, transforming himself into two ink-laden hands, which signed a simple phrase: "You are enough." So anyhow, that's what the white magic is all about. It's all just like, love yourself, which I get as an interpretation of white magic, but I did feel my eyes start to tilt back in my head just a bit at this point. But that's anyhow. So anyhow, through discovering the joy of white magic, Killian doesn't kill the guy, but then it turns out the person who invited him out to the bar and encouraged him to get into this duel anyhow and gave him that magical drink was actually an Auric agent. And that's where you see
she drugs him.
Yeah.
She straight up drugs him.
Yeah.
Huh.
So
that's her in the bathroom.
It's a nice bathroom.
That's what it says in the story.
That's actually not her. That's Exodus, and I'm pretty certain that's not a bathroom.
Yeah.
But still.
No, but this is how it, like, this is the scene in the story, is that it's her in the bathroom tempting him, not Exodus in some sort of beautiful library or whatever. And then anyhow, he decides not to go with her. But then the Auric attack the whole bar and are like gonna kill people. And so he comes out and he uses his white magic to save the day. And then his father approves because everybody's chanting for him. It's like the 80s high school movie ending, right? He saves the day with the big game.
And then gets like a 5-degree nod.
Oh,
it's like one corner of the mouth turns up, I think. Like, this guy would make Gendo Ikari feel like a softie.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Where to start with this one? So, if you follow me on Twitter, and if you followed me on Asians Represent, me and Daniel Kwan and Emma, a few other really great folks on Asian Represent have talked quite at length about the really poor choice of Asian representation here with Killian Liu. Essentially, we are seeing a lot of the references to the model minority myth. Not only that, but also just the fact that we are looking at the commodification, essentially, of Asian trauma here with Killian. And I think, to your point, Kathleen, before about how over the top and just incredibly, what's the word? It's so uncomfortable to me how much the story centered around Killian's suffering, around his pain, around his depression, around his guilt, and about his abuse. Not only that, but also, like, I'm not really certain. I almost feel a little offended by the fact that they decide to toss in the 5-degree Dean Ambrose not at the end, as if that somehow makes it's like, oh, you now have your abuser's approval, like things are maybe going to start to be okay. I'm like, it's like, my dude, like, this man literally put like ink on your hand, put a tattoo on your hand that would itch and burn if you do not meet your dad for an appointment or whatever. Like, that is, it's just narcissistic parenting at its finest.
Mm-hmm.
And by finest, I mean worst, because what we're seeing with Dean Ambrose here is a classic case of narcissistic parenting. The inability to look at your child, and see someone who is a realized human being with their own wants and desires and personality, but rather an extension of yourself. And there's just the very controlling nature of Ambrose this entire time was extremely off-putting to me. And
yeah, he's like a caricature in the worst possible way, and then it sort of makes Killian a caricature as well, right? Because you can't help but be one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and it's unfortunate that we don't really get to see who Killian is beyond his suffering, right? In both Dina's story and his story, we see that there are decisions that he makes. Sorry, my cat is being here and very cute, and I'm going to put her down. It's in both cases, it's like, the keystone to his character development is around his dad. There's nothing really past that. There is an attempt in the story to sort of bring him to the point where he can, like, oh, this is what I want to do. It's very similar to Rutho. Like, this is the magic that appeals to me. I'm going to go down this road. And then, like, his dad's like, 5-degree nod. Okay, you can do that because you saved the whole freaking school.
Right.
Or at least this bar to do it.
I don't buy it. I don't buy that his dad would have been impressed by any of that.
Yeah, I don't buy that, like, that either. Like, this, I don't buy that a man who literally brands his son with magic to keep tabs on him is going to give him a tacit nod of approval, even if he did save half the dang school. So it's a really, I can see what the writers were going for here. But at the end of the day, I still believe that this is a very this is the result of a lot of poor decisions. And it's, at the end of the day, a very, just a wasted opportunity, I think, to do something very, very cool with this character.
And it's also kind of like, in addition to that, it's a very shallow look at what you can do with words.
Yes. I was hoping, I mean, we were talking about, I remember when Silver Quill came, we were talking about, like, oh, this would be super cool to have, like, epic rap battles, or, like, poetry slams, or
the student newspaper.
Journalism. But instead, it's literally just shouting insults at one another.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we see there's a lot of focus on the black aligned sort of battle magic in this story. And very little on how, like, the white magic can have, like, healing and encouraging words. You get a little bit of that in Rutha's story, because they have, like, her friend go over and be like, try to encourage her, and it just makes Rutha annoyed. I think, because nobody likes feeling manipulated. But I mean, I don't like that even the white magic is manipulative, but it kind of fits with the flavor pie. Anyhow, I digress. I will say there is in the fight scene between Killian and Dina's boyfriend. He does use his black magic to, like, make, like, spider legs, and actually physically, like, make magical spider legs out of ink magic, and then raise himself, like, 12 feet in the air on these gigantic spindly spider legs. And that did appeal to me.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. That was like the new Iron Man, the new Tony Stark, like, spider suit that we see in Infinity War. I kind of like that. That was pretty cool. I guess I'm trying to think of, I mean, one thing that also kind of, like, threw me off of this story was the fact that, I mean, I can't really, it's hard to wrap my mind around the fact that the school is okay with this. Like, that the school is okay with one of their deans, like, treating their students like this. Like, it's very weird. It is suggested that, Killian's not the only person to walk around with, like, the writing on his hand like that. But nevertheless, it just seems like such a weirdly, like, it straddles. I feel like we lose a little bit of that fantasy setting, right? And this is something I've talked about a little bit too in like Karator. We're reading through that in Ages Represent. But when you choose to insert um, issues like abuse, like racism, systems of oppression within fantasy, the question becomes, why do you why do this? What impact will it have? From whose perspective are you taking this from? And is this necessary? Like, what is this adding to the narrative?
Mm.
And I feel like for Killian's story, these questions aren't being answered adequately. I think that what you were saying before, Cam, like this does feel very shallow,
Hmm.
and not just in terms of how Silver Quill was represented, but also in terms of Killian's relationship with his dad. Um, like, I'm glad that we got more of a story to kind of iron a little bit more of this out, to tease a little bit more of this relationship forward, but I still don't really buy that this is enough to really help us understand the nuances here of such a complex human interaction.
Right. And like these are each of the student stories are kind of like single installment, right?
Hmm.
So
Mostly, yeah.
you don't really get much space to explore what is a what maybe if this was like a 10 short story arc,
Mm.
you could get into the kind of depth you would need. But in 1,000 words,
Hmm. I mean, I've referenced this before. I mean, like, but there are entire novels written about this concept, this kind of relationship between people. Like when you think of Amy Tan has written
mhm.
several books. I mean, Joy Luck Club, for example, kind of gets into this. And even then, that is a very good, decent sized book. Still doesn't quite delve into everything, and so I just sort of question the decisions here around um, going forward with this sort of narrative, given how many facets there are.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Um, but yeah, it's other than that, I mean, like, Killian looks real good. I dig the strict. I dig the silver quill style. I think it's I think it's interesting that what the dynamic between the white dean and Dean Ambrose, who is the black magic dean.
mhm.
I mean, we've seen this sort of, we see this with the flip cards in the set. How these two deans sort of exemplify two different aspects of that
Hmm.
college, and they're constantly always warring with each other. So Shael does show up in this story, but she helps basically give Killian some encouragement. But I do wish there had been a little bit more there in terms of really delving into those more positive aspects of language arts, or at least a good rap battle. I don't know.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Like, yeah. Yeah.
Or a
No.
sonnet showdown, something like that. I'm
Mhm.
not I'm not picky.
Right. Or even just like, not. I don't know why uh, Silver Quill has to be combative.
That
Right.
is a very interesting decision. I mean, we have heard that it was partially inspired by like the ROTC
Hmm.
in some ways.
Right. That the for a non-American audience, that would be the, what is it, the officer training candidacy, regular
Yeah.
officer training candidacy,
Yes.
which is an American military kind of on-campus recruiting thing, from
Hmm.
what I understand.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, you get some preparatory training in military. We get some preparatory military training essentially,
Hmm.
in terms of combat and also just fitness and whatnot.
Mm.
Right. Yeah, because like when I think of I like poetry. Um, I did one of my first degree was in English, and it's very rarely about battle, right? You're not, the nature of school is kind of collaborative.
Hmm.
I think you get that from like the white magic side, but of
Mhm.
course, like you don't get to see that in Killian's story, except as
No.
like an active rebellion.
Hmm.
It's like,
But
no, I don't want to
yeah,
destroy. I want to create. So angsty. Fling
um,
some ink.
I
make legs.
I do like that the schools don't seem kind of like extremely siloed from one another, right? The students from the various colleges interact with one another and spend time with one another and don't seem uh, hostile to one another.
No.
Mhm.
I know, like, in Zimone's story, you see that she's got, like, friends who joined different colleges, but they still, like, hang out.
Hmm.
And that's very accurate, I think, for a university setting, right? Because a university will have various different colleges, engineering, arts and sciences, etc. So
Hmm.
that definitely holds true. But in that vein, I guess I agree with Cam in the sense that like I don't really understand the necessity of having a military wing of the school, especially since during the invasion of the Auric, the entire school gets in on that action, right? The
Mhm.
entire school mobilizes to defeat those forces. It's not just the Silver Quill. Um,
Right.
so it kind of begs the question, like, why have this aspect then?
Yeah,
Um,
like a military is kind of a thing you have. I have similar questions in Ravnica, right?
mhm.
Why does Ravnica have a standing army? Right? Like not notionally it's to control Gruul and Rakdos uprisings, but a military doesn't exist without a subject,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
right? Um, and that just seemed peculiar to me in Strixhaven, where it's like, who are they fighting? Right? Why have the enormous expenditure of a military?
Yeah, why train all these individuals in combat magic if it's not really if they're not the first line of defense
Hmm. Hmm.
here? So yeah, yeah, we can see in Defend the Campus. That's a lore hole, Dean, right there. um, and I can't actually see the other one. I think that might be Shail. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, it's absolutely not just Silver Quill coming in and being like, okay, we got this. Other colleges, I don't know, go man, like set up defenses elsewhere. Um,
Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know.
We don't.
It's
I mean,
yeah.
maybe I would know more if I had read the main story, but I didn't find out a lot about Arcavios, the plane,
Right.
in these
This
stories.
this really sounds like they're setting up for a return to Strixhaven.
Well,
Um,
maybe
where
that
where
would be great.
where
They have 5
hopefully
other
these
color pairs.
yeah. Well, like one of my favorite mechanical interpretations of or one of my I guess my favorite mechanical thing in the game is that the Prismari students, their artwork is represented by treasure tokens. And a treasure token you can sacrifice it and generate mana of any color. So in a very literal way, the Prismari students are able to parse everyone else's magic through their art,
Mm.
right? Because it's kind of like this inherently empathetic thing.
Hmm.
I just enjoyed that. I thought that was a great mechanical interpretation of something that I feel is true.
Prismari art is made of like pure magic.
Hmm.
Like at the end of Ruth's story, she gets really mad and basically she calls it a tantrum. And then there's like this puff of red magic and it just, it looks chaotic and it sounds like screeching, but she's like, oh, if I adjusted things here and there, I could make it sound like something. So it's like literal magic made form and held still or in a constant loop or something.
Right.
Hmm.
And I do like the idea that uh, all of the mascots are also interpretations of the school's magic, right? Like an inkling, which is made of like, black magic and white magic, is quite far away from a thrall,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is kind of a similar idea, a
Yeah,
vessel for storing things.
I really enjoy the interpretations of the different enemy color pairs on this world, particularly with Lorehold. Lorehold and Prismari, I think, are my two favorites in
Hmm.
terms of how like different they are from what we expect from like the Boros and the Izzet,
Right.
at least on Ravnica, for instance. I mean, those are the two more famous color pair interpretations. I always like to say that the colors of magic are a spectrum, and they can be interpreted and manifested in different ways. One thing I love about the Prismari, for instance, is that sure, we do have like these visual representations of magic and art, but for example, we also have Zephi, Master Conductor, who is actually one of my favorite cards, not necessarily mechanically, but just art wise. I've always wanted to see music interpreting it into a magic sphere and into the magic game. And it's really cool to see this conductor channeling sound into magic and
Right.
being able to manifest that into great works. That's, I think, really, really cool. I also just love the way Lorehold is like, we're here to learn from the past in an active way. We're actively learning about it. So we see a little bit, I think, of the Abzan from this, right? Because there's a connection to the past there. But here it's way more like Indiana Jones, and I'm in love with that. It's so cool.
Yeah. I also love Zaphi's art because the horns are bells up, so something's going down, right? Like that's never a good thing when the horns go bells up.
Bells up's like, ah!
Somebody's going to get duded. But I think that probably brings us to an end for this episode of Tap Tap Concede. It's not the smoothest segue, but in the spirit of Nelson, consider cardkingdom.com/LRR.
If you want to get Zaphi, you can definitely check them out at
Good.
Yeah, sorry. I've been doing Laura Goyce is also sponsored by Card Kingdom, so I'm like, I got you. We've done this. But yeah, if you want to get any of these awesome cards, I mean, Zaphi Thunder Conductor, such a cool Prismari commander. You can get him and any of the other amazing Strixhaven products at cardkingdom.com, and you can use I believe your affiliate link, cardkingdom.com/LRR.
Yes, thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, no worries.
Also, don't forget to put in Loading Ready Run Sent Us button, please, and you'll get a button that says foil lands make foil mana. Also, this was brought to you by you, the viewer, over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. You did this. Michelle.
Thank you.
Where can people find you?
If you'd like to hear more of what I have to say, you could always find me on Twitter at Kiln Fiend Potter, like the Popper staple, Kiln Fiend Potter. And if you're interested, I also, like I mentioned before, I appear on Asians Represent, talking about representations of AAPI folks within gaming and TTRPGs. I'm also a bit of an artist. So as I mentioned before, I do pottery, and if you're interested in getting a mug such as this one that I am drinking out of with a little owl on it, that just happened to be there. I didn't mean to make that a thing, but if you're
product placement, go with it.
Yes. If you need a ceramic item to drink things out of, you can check out my website, kilnfiendpottery.com. I do ship everywhere that is legal within, that the United States will let me ship to. So, thank you.
Outstanding. All right.
It won't be as fast as Card Kingdom, but I will do what I can.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on Tap Tap Concede. I've been Cameron.
I've been Kathleen.
And I'm Michelle.
So we'll catch you in the future. And until then,
may you find your screaming possum.
Yes! May you find your screaming possum.